Night lies over the Sahara like a vast black sea. The wind has gone still. Heat exhales from the sand in slow waves, a pulse you can almost feel through your skin. In that silence, every dune seems alive, breathing, waiting, remembering. From orbit, this desert glows faintly under moonlight, its ridges bending like ancient ribs beneath a thin silver skin. To some it is emptiness. To others it is an archive that never sleeps. Every civilization leaves traces of itself. Stone, bones, stories. The Sahara leaves traces of everything, not because it was always desert, but because it was once the opposite. Buried beneath this immensity lies a record of rivers and forests, of animals that no longer roam, and of people who once followed the water. It is a landscape that changed shape with the breath of the planet, alternating between life and silence every 20 millennia. Each return of the rains rewrote the story of humanity. Each retreat erased it again. Scientists studying the Sahara today describe it as one of Earth's most restless regions. Beneath the dunes, radar satellites detect patterns invisible to the human eye: curving riverbeds, ancient deltas, faint scars where lakes once shimmered. These ghost waterways, the Tamanrasset, the Kufra, the vanished Megachad, are arteries turned to stone. In high-resolution imagery, they appear as veins on a sleeping giant, reminding us that what seems lifeless once carried the planet's pulse. Sediment cores drilled from the desert floor preserve microscopic fossils of pollen, fish scales, even traces of freshwater algae. Each layer marks a different era of climate. Together they whisper a story. Between roughly 14,000 and 5,000 BCE, monsoon rains reached far north, transforming the Sahara into a vast savanna threaded with lakes and wetlands. The people who lived there left behind tools, hearths, and drawings of animals that could not survive here now: hippos, crocodiles, elephants. The evidence is overwhelming, but it poses a deeper question. If the desert was once alive, how much of human life began here? To imagine that possibility is to shift the entire map of history. For centuries we have pointed to the Nile, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley as humanity's first great centers. Yet these river civilizations appear suddenly, already complex. What if their roots stretch westward, buried under the dunes that now separate North Africa from its past? The idea is not fantasy, it is the logical shadow cast by new data. When the climate changed and the Sahara dried, its people would have followed the water eastward, carrying with them their astronomy, their herds, their memory of abundance. In that migration might lie the missing preface to civilization itself. For now, the proof remains hidden. Archaeologists working in this harsh expanse describe the sand as both guardian and thief. It protects what it covers but resists every attempt to reach it. Equipment fails in the heat. Dunes move overnight, erasing camps and tire tracks as if nothing had ever happened. The desert keeps its secrets with patient precision. And yet, satellites see through its veil. Night after night, orbital sensors record anomalies: rectilinear shapes, buried channels, sediment stains too regular to be natural. Each discovery deepens the suspicion that under the Sahara sleeps not a wasteland, but an origin. The desert may be dreaming, but in its dreams the first sparks of civilization still glow. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear them: water running under sand, drums echoing in a humid night, the murmur of people who believed the stars were alive. The wind carries fragments of their language, reshaped into dust. Where are you listening from tonight, and at what time? Perhaps it's quiet where you are. Imagine this same quiet stretching across 9 million square kilometers, over dunes tall as cathedrals and valleys wide as seas. Somewhere beneath that silence, the earth remembers its own beginning. Next, we travel backward, through the layers of sand and time, to the age when the Sahara was not desert at all, but a garden of rivers. At dawn, the desert blushes faintly, as if remembering colour. Imagine that same horizon 12,000 years ago, not waves of sand, but an endless ocean of grass swaying under a violet sky. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the scent of wet soil and flowering acacia. Lakes mirrored clouds so bright that they looked like fragments of the heavens fallen to earth. From the foothills of the Hoggar Mountains to the basin of Chad, the Sahara was alive. Herds of elephants and giraffes wandered through wide green valleys. Hippos rolled in muddy shallows. Crocodiles basked on riverbanks beside reeds twice a man's height. Flocks of flamingos rose from lakes so large they shimmered on the horizon like inland seas. This was the African humid period, when the planet's slow tilt, the subtle breathing of Earth's orbit, drew the monsoon far to the north. Rains came with such regularity that the desert ceased to exist. In its place stretched a continent of water and life. From the perspective of space, it must have looked like a second Amazon. Satellite radar now reveals ghostly traces of that vanished paradise. Dry channels braided like silver roots, and crescent ridges of pebbles marking ancient shorelines. Each curve tells a story of ebb and overflow. Deep beneath the dunes, cores drilled by geologists show alternating layers of sand and clay, desert, then lake, then desert again, a planetary rhythm repeating for hundreds of thousands of years. In those clay bands lie microscopic fossils, pollen from oak and acacia, diatoms from freshwater algae, spores from ferns that no longer grow anywhere near the Sahara. Under a microscope, they resemble tiny emerald coins, evidence that this wasteland once bloomed with forest and grass. Even the wind carries memory. Grains of dust lifted from modern dunes often contain mineral signatures identical to ancient lake beds, as though the desert is exhaling its own past. And within those sediments, scientists find something unexpected: charcoal. Not the remains of lightning fires, but of hearths deliberately set and controlled. They mark the presence of people, small bands who followed rivers, fished, hunted, and built camps on the lake shores. Across Niger, Libya, and Chad, archaeologists uncover their tools: slender microliths of quartz, stone scrapers, arrowheads polished smooth by centuries of handling. Each piece fits the hand perfectly, as if its maker had just set it down. Along ancient shorelines lie fragments of pottery, baked in low fires and etched with wave-like patterns, perhaps inspired by the rippling water nearby. The oldest of these vessels predate Mesopotamian pottery by millennia. They tell of a culture with time to experiment, to decorate, to create. And there are footprints, real ones, pressed into what was once wet clay. Near the Paleo Lake of Gobero, fossilized tracks capture a single instant. A family walking together across damp ground, the prints of a child beside those of an adult. Nearby, the paw marks of a dog and the delicate impressions of gazelle hooves cross the same path. They dried quickly, sealed by a thin film of dust, and remained untouched until the present day. In those steps lies a story more intimate than any monument: people living in balance with an environment that nurtured them completely. To understand how such abundance could exist in what is now the world's largest desert, scientists turn to the Milankovitch cycles, slow changes in Earth's orbit and axial tilt. Every 20,000 years, these shifts alter how sunlight strikes the planet, tugging the tropical rainbelt north or south. When the rains reached the Sahara, rivers flourished. When they retreated, dunes advanced. It is the heartbeat of our planet. Inhale, green. Exhale, gold. Humanity's timeline has unfolded inside this cosmic pulse, civilizations rising and fading with the rhythm of the Earth itself. At the heart of this living landscape stretched Lake Megachad, once 5 times the size of modern France. Its shoreline extended nearly 1,000 kilometers, a freshwater sea shimmering in the center of the continent. Sediments from its floor hold the seeds of sorghum, pearl millet, and wild grains. Under microscopes, some seeds show deliberate cracking and polishing, signs of selective gathering, perhaps even early cultivation. These findings suggest that people in the Green Sahara may have been experimenting with farming thousands of years before the so-called birthplaces of agriculture in Mesopotamia. They read the weather, mapped animal migrations, and stored knowledge of waterholes that shifted with the seasons. Observation, repetition, and adaptation, the earliest tools of science, were born here. And from that knowledge came art. On cliffs in southern Algeria and northern Chad, colour still clings to stone despite 10,000 years of wind. Herds of cattle march across the walls. Hunters wield bows. Swimmers float through painted water. These images belong to a time when the desert was still a sea of grass. The people who made them were not merely surviving, they were reflecting. Their art speaks of community, of ritual, of time to dream. In their pigments we see the first merging of observation and imagination, the birth of culture itself. The Green Sahara was not a blank canvas awaiting life. It was the classroom of civilization. Rivers provided movement, stars offered calendars, and abundance gave humanity the freedom to think beyond survival. Every field of science, astronomy, agriculture, art, can trace faint roots to this forgotten garden. Yet no paradise lasts forever. By around 6,000 years ago, the monsoon began to fade. Lakes receded, their shorelines crusted with salt. The air grew hotter, the rains unpredictable. Grasses wilted, then vanished. Within centuries, the transformation was complete. The Sahara began to exhale again. Where rivers once sparkled, only sand remained. Somewhere in that fading world, a family packed their tools and followed the shrinking water's edge. Their footprints hardened into clay, a message for us across millennia. What do you think they saw in those final days? And did they know they were watching their world disappear? We'll trace their journey and uncover the first real signs that human cooperation, ritual, and memory were already blooming amid the retreating waters. The story of footprints in wet clay. Before the Sahara turned to dust, people walked its lake shores as naturally as we stroll along city streets. Their camps ringed the water like necklaces, each bead a cluster of huts, hearths, and laughter. At dusk, the surface of the lakes caught the reflection of fires. Small constellations mirrored on the water. When the monsoon clouds gathered, the air shimmered with insects and smoke. When they broke, the earth drank deeply, leaving behind puddles that held the sky. It was here, amid those brief seasons of balance, that the first outlines of civilization began to take shape. Archaeologists call one such place Gobero in modern Niger, a site discovered by accident when shifting dunes exposed fragments of bone glittering in the afternoon sun. What they found beneath that thin crust of sand changed everything. It was not a random scattering of remains, but a carefully arranged cemetery beside an ancient lake nearly 10,000 years old. Skeletons lay in postures of care and meaning, one woman cradling 2 children, their small hands still touching across 10 millennia. Around them were beads carved from shells, arrowheads of stone, and pollen grains, the ghosts of flowers laid at their burial. It was not just death they buried, it was memory. And memory, anthropologists remind us, is the first architecture of culture. Gobero's excavation revealed 2 distinct layers of life, 2 civilizations sharing the same sacred ground, separated by centuries of drought. The first, the Kivian people, were tall, muscular fishers who lived when the lake was full, its waters stretching like an inland sea. They hunted giant perch, some over 2 meters long, using barbed harpoons carved from bone. Then the rains failed. The lake dried. For nearly 1,000 years the dunes swallowed the shore, and then when the monsoon returned, a new people appeared. the Tenerian, shorter, more delicate, herders who brought cattle and new customs. Their pottery bore different patterns, their jewelry finer, their rituals quieter, but no less profound. Between the two cultures lies a silent gap, a 1,000-year breadth of the planet, proof that even when nature erased the landscape, memory endured. Every discovery at Gobero speaks of intelligence and empathy. Many skeletons rest with arms folded over the chest, facing east toward the sunrise. Some graves contain pairs, suggesting family or lovers. Others hold offerings, animal bones, tools, small polished stones. Even in prehistory, death was ceremony. That instinct for reverence marks the beginning of the human mind turning inward, shaping belief from loss. Here, in a desert that would one day be barren, we find the birthplace of compassion. Further north, in the Tadrat Akarkas Mountains of Libya, rock shelters preserve another form of testimony. Painted along the walls are swimmers, long rows of human figures with outstretched arms, surrounded by fish and reeds. For decades, scholars assumed these swimmers were symbolic, some kind of spiritual metaphor. Then, satellite radar revealed ancient channels nearby, valleys once filled with water. The paintings were not myth, they were diaries, literal records of daily life. The artists captured their world exactly as it was, lush, aquatic, alive. The Cave of the Swimmers, as it's now known, became an accidental time capsule of climate history. Elsewhere, in Uan Muhugyag and Tassili Naja, archaeologists unearth polished tools lying beside shards of pottery decorated with rippling motifs that echo waves or currents. These designs were not aesthetic flourishes, they were observation-made art. The people of the Green Sahara painted and carved what they lived with: the rhythm of water, the movement of animals, the cycle of rain. To form clay, fire it, and decorate it required not only skill, but collaboration. These communities depended on shared labour, gathering wood for fuel, carrying water, teaching craft. From such cooperation came planning, and from planning, society. Chemical analysis of human remains deepens the picture. The bones from Gobero and Akarkas contain isotopes of nitrogen and carbon consistent with a fish-rich diet, evidence that the lakes and rivers sustained entire populations. Mixed among them are bones of cattle and goats, showing that these early Saharans were not merely hunters but herders, among the first to domesticate animals on the continent. They managed the ecosystem with awareness, adjusting their movement to rainfall, balancing use and regeneration. That relationship between observation and adaptation, reading the land and responding in kind, is the essence of sustainable civilization. Even their tools speak of ingenuity. Harpoons carved from hippo tusk, grindstones for crushing seeds, and polished beads shaped from ostrich eggshell. Some artifacts carry traces of red ochre, a pigment used for both art and ritual, suggesting a belief that colour could bridge the gap between the living and the divine. It is here that survival begins to blend with symbolism, where utility becomes ceremony and the practical transforms into the sacred. DNA extracted from these ancient burials connects their makers faintly to later peoples along the Nile and across the Sahel. The genetic threads are delicate but unmistakable, a line of descent linking the Sahara's forgotten herders to those who would one day raise temples beside the river. When the lakes vanished, the people followed the water east, carrying not only their flocks and tools but their worldview, the worship of cycles, the reading of stars, the sense that order could be drawn from chaos. One could say that Egypt began walking east long before its pyramids rose. Yet what remains to us are humble things: a carved bead, the blackened ring of an ancient hearth, the faint curve of a child's footprint hardened into clay. Each one whispers that organization, empathy, and imagination existed here before history had a name. The desert remembers them in silence, the way a tide remembers a vanished shore. To stand at Gobero today is to stand between worlds. The lakebed gleams under moonlight. The dunes whisper where water once lapped. In that stillness, it's difficult not to feel that something vast began here, something we have almost forgotten. If the Sahara could speak, what would it tell us about those who first turned survival into ceremony, and how their stories endured long after their footprints vanished? Perhaps the whispers of their memory still move beneath the dunes, reshaped into legends of lost cities and circular worlds, echoes that drift through time, half forgotten yet never gone. Follow that sound deeper into the sand, where myth and geology begin to blur, and a great spiral in the heart of the desert still seems to remember what once was. The story of lost worlds did not begin with maps or machines, it began with memory. Long before satellites revealed rivers buried beneath the Sahara, humanity whispered of civilizations swallowed by sand and sea. Around campfires and temple halls, across continents and languages, the same refrain appeared. There was once a world of harmony and knowledge, now gone. To the Greeks it was Atlantis, the island of wisdom consumed by the ocean. To the Berber and Tuareg of North Africa, it was the Green Sahara, a land of gardens and wells, where cities once sang beneath palm groves before the desert claimed them. To others still, it was the Sea of Trees, a place so lush that even the sky seemed to bloom. Every culture that bordered the desert carried fragments of this memory, like shards of pottery from a single broken vessel. The details change, but the shape remains. A paradise undone by nature, an echo of order collapsing into silence. Was this mere coincidence, or were all these stories remembering the same lost chapter of Earth's history? In the 1930s, European pilots flying mail routes across Mauritania began to report something extraordinary. A colossal spiral carved into the heart of the desert, perfectly circular and visible only from the air. It stretched nearly 50 kilometers across, its concentric rings etched into the land like the iris of a giant eye staring up through the dust. From above, it looked impossibly deliberate, as though the earth itself had formed an ancient symbol. Today, we call it the Richet structure, or more poetically, the Eye of the Sahara. When explorers landed to investigate, they were astonished by its geometry. Layer upon layer of limestone, quartz, and volcanic rock formed perfect rings rising and falling in rhythm. Early theories suggested a meteor impact or even the remains of a forgotten fortress city. Later, geologists determined that the structure was natural. A deeply eroded geologic dome, its center once thrust upward by volcanic pressure and slowly sculpted by wind and time. And yet, even knowing that, the sense of design refuses to fade. The eye looks too human, too intentional, as though creation itself had signed its name upon the desert. Around its rim, archaeologists have found stone tools, fossilized shells, and fish bones, confirming that this arid expanse once teemed with water and life. Ancient riverbeds converge near the formation, and satellite radar has revealed faint channels leading west toward what was once a vast Atlantic delta. The evidence suggests that the Eye of the Sahara once stood near a coastal plain, its spiral basin possibly flooded in parts during the African humid period. It is easy to imagine how such a site, seen from high ground or remembered in fading oral tales, could evolve into the legend of a circular city lost to the sea. The parallels with Plato's Atlantis are uncanny. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he describes an island ringed by canals and walls, guarded by mountains to the north and open to the sea to the south. The Richet structure matches that orientation precisely. Its central plateau aligns with what could have been a citadel. Its surrounding rings resemble canals or defensive moats. Even the scale fits Plato's account when converted from Greek stadia to modern units. To some, this cannot be coincidence. To others, it is a mirror of human imagination, a legend reflecting geology, not history. But what if both are true? What if the myth of Atlantis was never about an island, but a memory of the Sahara itself, a civilization drowned not by the ocean, but by drought. Plato spoke of a great flood that erased the past. The Sahara, too, suffered its own apocalypse when the monsoon withdrew and the lakes died. The world that perished here was not mythical. It was geological, climatic, and profoundly human. Across the continent, similar echoes remain. In Tuareg oral tradition, there is talk of Tisilit, the city of wells, buried after the gods withdrew the rains. In Berber lore, an inland sea once stretched from Libya to Mauritania, a memory perhaps of Lake Megachad or the vanished Tamanrasset River that once flowed westward to the Atlantic. Even ancient Egyptian texts refer to the lands of the west that sank beneath the sand. These are not tales of divine punishment. They are records of transition, when the earth changed its breath and people were forced to move with it. Memory became myth, and myth became the language of survival. Modern science, in a way, has begun to bring those myths back into focus. High-resolution radar mapping has traced circular basins and linear channels radiating outward from the Reshet region. Some correspond perfectly with ancient hydrological systems, the arteries of an ecosystem long gone. The eye, once surrounded by rivers and estuaries, now sits stranded in a desert of stone. If humans lived there, they would have watched the waters recede, generation after generation, until the spiral of abundance collapsed inward. For them, it must have felt like the end of the world. For their descendants, that feeling became a story. A warning told in symbols of rings and floods, of gods and balance lost. How does this connect to our question? What if civilization began beneath the sands of the Sahara? Because myths are not lies. They are fossils of perception. Just as bones record the shape of the body, legends record the shape of memory. The Eye of the Sahara stands as both artifact and allegory, a geological scar that mirrors humanity's oldest story, creation, destruction, and the haunting persistence of remembrance. Stand upon its rim at sunset. The air shimmers with heat, and the horizon curves away like the lip of a vast bowl. The wind slides through the concentric ridges, producing a deep, hollow tone, almost like breathing. In that sound, it's easy to imagine the desert whispering to itself, the wind repeating an ancient name we've forgotten how to hear. If the eye truly remembers, what else lies hidden in the body of the desert? Perhaps the answer runs beneath us still, in rivers that have not flowed for thousands of years, in channels that once tied this land to the sea. Let's follow those whispers downward, into the buried arteries of the Sahara, where rivers still sleep and the dream of water continues. From above, the Sahara appears endless, an ocean of light, heat, and silence. But this stillness is an illusion. Beneath its rippling dunes lies another world, a world shaped not by wind but by water. Hidden far below, radar and satellite sensors detect the ghostly traces of ancient rivers. Immense arteries that once pulsed through the desert, feeding lakes, forests, and civilizations now lost. Their paths, though dry for thousands of years, remain perfectly preserved, etched into the bedrock like the veins of a sleeping giant. They are called the sleeping rivers of the Sahara, and when we look at them from orbit, the desert changes before our eyes. The dunes transform into a fossilized delta, the sand revealing its secret anatomy. The largest of these rivers is the Tamanrasset, an invisible colossus buried beneath southern Algeria and Mauritania. If it flowed today, it would rival the Nile in scale, nearly 1,200 kilometers long, draining an area larger than modern France. Its ancient channel begins high in the Ahaga Mountains, threads through the central desert, and empties into the Atlantic near what is now Nouakchott. In 2003, NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission pierced the dunes and exposed its full course. A sweeping, unmistakable valley, hundreds of meters deep, hidden under sand. During the last Green Sahara, about 10,000 years ago, The monsoon rains would have fed this river continuously. It became a superhighway of life, linking inland lakes like Megachad and Tassili wetlands to the ocean. The sediments it carried nourished forests and plains, while its deltas hosted birds, fish, and people. Imagine standing there then, not a desert, but a vast living corridor of water and sound, where herds crossed and canoes drifted under acacia shade. Other ghost rivers lie dormant in the east, the Kufra, the Hawa, and the Wadi Taman Hint. To the untrained eye, they are nothing more than shallow depressions and faint colour changes in satellite photos. But to geologists, these are arteries of time. Sediment cores drawn from their basins reveal layer upon layer of clay, silt, and organic matter rich in pollen grains and diatoms, the microscopic skeletons of freshwater algae. Under magnification, these diatoms sparkle like stars, each one a frozen instant of life. Their shapes, delicate discs and filaments, tell scientists what kind of water once flowed there: deep, still, clear. It is astonishing to realize that these invisible fossils are the handwriting of rain that fell 10 millennia ago. To ancient peoples, these rivers were not invisible lines on a map. They were living beings. Many Saharan tribes still tell stories of underground serpents, streams that slither beneath the dunes and surface only to drink the rain. Some Tuareg elders claim to hear the sound of water walking below. Modern science, with its wells and radar, has confirmed that their myths hold truth. Beneath the desert stretches one of the world's greatest aquifers, the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer System, a sea of fossil water trapped since the last humid age. Its volume is almost 20 times the Great Lakes combined. Every drop is a letter written by ancient monsoon rains, preserved in darkness. When modern wells reach it, they are literally tapping the past. Archaeology follows these same invisible lines. Along the paths of these buried rivers, scientists find Stone Age camps, pottery fragments, hearths, and bone tools. Even in places where no surface water has flowed for 5,000 years, traces of ancient life cluster around the phantom riverbeds. Charcoal remnants show where fires once burned. Grinding stones, fish bones, and beads of ostrich shell hint at trade and travel. These people did not wander aimlessly. They followed the river's seasonal pulse, moving as the waters rose and fell. Their migrations, repeated over centuries, carved invisible highways through the desert, routes that later became the foundations of trans-Saharan trade. Civilization, in a sense, began by tracing the veins of the earth. Water dictated not just where people lived, but how they thought. To follow water is to learn patience. To wait for rain is to measure time. In that observation, humanity found rhythm, calendar, and belief. Perhaps that is why, even in later faiths, rivers are sacred. They carry both memory and prophecy. Modern technology brings this lost hydrological network back to life. High-resolution radar and computer simulations allow scientists to reconstruct the Green Sahara in stunning detail, lakes shimmering like mirrors, rivers braiding through valleys, dunes replaced by rolling grasslands. In these reconstructions, the Sahara emerges as a continent within a continent, an interconnected ecosystem that may have linked the Mediterranean, the Nile, and West Africa in one living system of exchange. Ideas could have travelled these corridors as easily as trade goods. Tool-making techniques, myths of flood and rebirth, even the rhythmic drumming patterns that survive in West African music today. One image from space remains unforgettable. The delta of the Tamanrasset, now submerged beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Core samples from the seabed reveal fine-grained sand mixed with ancient organic matter, the sediment signature of a once mighty river. It is evidence that the Sahara was not isolated, but part of Earth's global circulation. From here, perhaps, early humans reached coastal routes, spreading not just across Africa, but outward toward the world. How does this help us understand the Sahara as a cradle of civilization? Because water is more than a physical necessity. It is memory made liquid. Where rivers flow, settlements form. Where they vanish, legends rise to take their place. These sleeping rivers mark the first lines humanity ever drew on the planet, the ones we still follow unconsciously, the pulse of movement, adaptation, and renewal. Civilization did not begin beside a single river. It began wherever water taught us to listen. If you stand today on the crest of a high dune and close your eyes, you may feel it. A vibration beneath the silence, a deep hum that seems to rise from the ground itself. Some say it's wind, others say it's the sound of water dreaming. But what if those dreams were recorded in colour, painted on stone by the people who lived with the rain, who thanked the sky in song and image? Let's follow that echo next, into the canyons of Algeria and Chad, where the ancient Sahara still speaks through its walls. In the middle of the desert, where the sun bleaches stone into bone, colour still survives. If you walk through the canyons of Tassilinaja in southeastern Algeria, the silence feels sacred. Every breath echoes through a cathedral of rock. Look closer at the walls, and you find colour clinging stubbornly to the surface. Ochres, reds, blacks, yellows, thousands of human and animal forms moving across the stone. Dancers with raised arms, swimmers gliding through long-vanished lakes, herders guiding cattle under rain. They are the voices of the green Sahara, speaking softly across 10,000 years, recorded not in words but in pigment and dust. These paintings are far more than decoration. They are a diary of survival, a record of how people saw themselves within a living world. Archaeologists classify them into 4 major artistic eras: the Roundhead, pastoral, or cattle, horse and camel periods, each one mirroring a stage in the Sahara's slow transformation from fertile savanna to arid desert. In the earliest, the Roundhead period, colossal beings with circular faces and featureless expressions float among elephants, giraffes, and buffalo. Their heads are halos of power, their arms outstretched as if calling the rain itself. Water was everywhere then, rivers running, lakes shimmering, clouds heavy above the horizon. Later, as the land began to dry, the cattle period appeared. Images of people holding ropes, milking cows, or leading processions of animals through tall grass. The tone shifts from the celebration of wild abundance to careful management, from hunter to herder, from participant in nature to planner of it. It is a visual record of adaptation. Some scenes are intimate, a woman grinding grain beside a child, or a figure pouring milk into a bowl with slow, deliberate grace. Others are immense and mysterious. Deep inside one vast shelter known as Sephar, a figure nearly 3 meters tall spreads its arms wide, crowned with horns, surrounded by smaller people who seem to worship or dance around it. Scholars call it the horned god, though its meaning is elusive. Some believe it represents fertility or rainfall. Others say it shows a shaman mid-trance, a moment where the human and divine merge. Whether god, symbol, or metaphor, the figure reveals something profound. These people were already thinking in abstractions, connecting the physical world with the invisible one. Scientists have studied the pigments under microscopes. Each colour tells a story of skill and patience. The reds come from hematite ground to powder, the blacks from manganese oxide, the yellows from limonite. Binders made from animal fat, tree sap, and even egg yolk allowed the paint to fuse with the stone. Some artists used brushes of reed or hair. Others blew pigment through hollow bones, leaving fine mists of colour like breath frozen in time. When radiocarbon dated, many of these paintings are older than the pyramids. Yet they remain vivid, their lines clear, their hues almost defiant against the centuries. In this sense, the canyon walls of Tassili are the Sahara's first libraries, and each painting is a page still open to be read. The art does more than display beauty. It reveals social complexity. Herding scenes suggest cooperation, shared labour, and planning. To manage cattle across the seasons, herders needed calendars, an understanding of rain cycles, and collective decision-making. Some paintings show circular pens and corrals, the first signs of architecture drawn from imagination. To depict an enclosure is to conceptualize property, to claim a space as belonging to the community. In these strokes of ochre and red lies the blueprint of society itself. Patterns recur across the art: spirals, concentric circles, and radiating dots, shapes that may represent waterholes, rainfall, or even the stars. The repetition of these motifs suggests an early visual language, one that connected the Earth to the cosmos. Strikingly, the same geometry reappears thousands of years later in sacred designs from Egypt, Crete, and the Mediterranean. The circular motif of the eye of the Sahara, the solar discs of the pharaohs, the mandala-like symbols of ancient temples, all echo this idea of eternal renewal. It's as though the concept of cycles, of life endlessly returning, was first painted here under the monsoon rains. Ethnographers studying modern Tuareg and Fulani herders find living echoes of this ancient symbolism. Tuareg women still paint spirals and dots on tents and jewellery, patterns meant to call protection and balance. During the dry season, elders sing to summon rain, their rhythms rising and falling like thunder. Among the Fulani, cattle are still seen as a mirror of the soul, their patterns and movements believed to reflect harmony between people and nature. These customs are not coincidences, they are continuations, threads of memory woven across millennia. When European explorers first stumbled upon Tassili's art in the 1930s, they could hardly believe what they saw. The Sahara had long been considered a void, a barren divider between civilizations. Yet here was evidence of a sophisticated culture full of grace and thought. The discovery forced science to redraw the map of prehistory. The desert was not a blank space. It was a cradle, one that nurtured the first expressions of philosophy, art, and collective meaning. And so we return to the question, how does this help us see the Sahara as a birthplace of civilization? Because art is not an accident, it is the fingerprint of consciousness. These ancient painters recorded more than animals and weather. They captured rhythm, memory, and ritual. Proof that our ancestors could translate experience into symbol, emotion into permanence. In every stroke of colour, they preserved the first vocabulary of humanity: rain, animal, spirit, time. Stand inside one of these painted canyons at dusk. The rock glows amber as sunlight fades, and the figures begin to stir under shadow. The air hums faintly, as if the voices of the artists still linger between stone and sky. For a heartbeat, it feels as though the paintings are breathing, the desert alive again with motion and memory. And as darkness deepens, you notice something else. Above those silent walls, the stars emerge one by one, the same constellations those painters once followed. Their hands shape stories of rain, but their eyes always turned upward. What patterns did they trace there, and what did they believe the heavens were trying to tell them? Long before the pyramids rose from the Nile, long before stone was cut and polished into pharaonic perfection, a smaller circle of stones stood silently in the desert. It lies today near the border of Egypt and Sudan, half buried, half forgotten. A humble yet astonishing monument called Nabta Playa. To an untrained eye, it might appear unremarkable. A few upright slabs forming a modest circle surrounded by faint mounds of sand. But the eye that lingers begins to sense a pattern. When archaeologists first measured the alignments, they discovered that these stones were not placed at random. Each pair points with deliberate precision, one toward the sunrise at the summer solstice, another toward the rising of Orion's belt and Sirius, the bright dog star whose annual reappearance still signals the Nile's flooding thousands of years later. That realization changed everything. Nabta Playa, built more than 7,000 years ago, is now recognized as one of humanity's oldest astronomical observatories. A calendar carved in stone, marking the moment when the Sahara's sky became the first textbook of time. During the Green Sahara, this basin was a seasonal lake. Each year, as the monsoon returned, its waters mirrored the heavens, doubling the sky. Herds came to drink, people followed, camping along the edges. Their survival depended on prediction, knowing when the clouds would form, when grass would grow, when the herds would calve. To master those rhythms was to master life itself, so they watched the stars, not as dreamers, but as scientists, patient and precise. For generations they must have stood in this same place, charting where the sun rose and fell, measuring the length of shadows, memorizing which stars vanished with the dawn. Slowly, patterns emerged, a cosmic pulse matching the Earth's. To mark that knowledge, they raised the stones, each one hauled by many hands, each aligned to a celestial event that would return faithfully year after year. This was not mere survival, this was the birth of astronomy. Around the main circle, archaeologists found tumuli, stone mounds containing the remains of cattle, carefully buried and oriented with ritual care. These animals were not butchered for meat, they were offerings, sacrifices to the sky, to the unseen forces that governed rain. The people of Nabta gave back to the heavens what they valued most, sealing a contract between earth and cosmos. To offer one's sustenance in exchange for continued life, that act, quiet and profound, marks one of the earliest steps toward religion. The stones themselves are massive, some weighing several tons. To move them across kilometers of desert required not only strength but cooperation, organization, shared belief, and patience. Each alignment had to be tested across seasons, refined with precision. Their builders understood geometry, horizon, and symmetry. Nabta Playa was no accidental construction. It was design with purpose, an architecture of observation. The more we study it, the clearer its legacy becomes. The same principles of orientation, solar, stellar, and cardinal, later appear in the temples of Karnak and Luxor and in the layout of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The Nile priests who aligned their monuments to Orion's belt were inheriting a tradition already ancient, born not beside the river, but in the sands to its west. This connection hints at a deeper truth. The sacred order of Egypt may have first taken form under open desert skies. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic balance and harmony, likely grew from the experience of nomads who watched the heavens turn with mathematical precision. For them, the sky was a living system of rules. When Sirius rose, the floods came. When Orion tilted, the rains shifted. To live was to obey those laws, to exist within a cosmic rhythm. Over generations, practical observation transformed into mythic cosmology. The sun became a god that died and was reborn. The stars became the spirits of ancestors guiding the living through night, and Nabta was not alone. Across the Sahara, smaller stone circles and alignments stretch from Mali to Chad, markers of solstice, equinox, and horizon. Some align with the Milky Way's arc, others with the north-south meridian. Together they form a network of ancient skywatching stations, evidence of a shared awareness spread across thousands of kilometers. The desert, vast and unobstructed, was the perfect observatory, a place where horizon and heaven touched with no boundary between. Under such a dome, how could early humans not feel the universe watching back? The beauty of this realization lies not only in its science, but in its poetry. Lying on one's back among the dunes, the Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, the same river the ancient observers must have traced with their eyes. To them, perhaps, it was a reflection of the very rivers that nourished their herds below. As above, so below. This symmetry between earth and sky became a philosophy, one that later civilizations would build temples, calendars, and empires upon. The people who built Nabta did not see science and spirituality as separate domains. Measuring the stars was also measuring themselves, their faith, their patience, their understanding of cycles. Through this synthesis of observation and reverence, humanity took one of its most important intellectual steps, turning the patterns of the natural world into a moral and cosmic order. The result was civilization, not as a place, but as an idea. How does this deepen our understanding of the Sahara's hidden beginnings? Because it shows that knowledge born of necessity becomes meaning through reflection. The Green Sahara's astronomers learned to predict rain. Their descendants turned that knowledge into worship, their calendars into cathedrals. The sky became law, time became sacred. From that reverence for order came everything: architecture, governance, myth, and mathematics. Even today, when the night wind sweeps across Nabta Playa, you can almost hear the faint echo of drums and chants, a rhythm once synchronized with the stars. Each pulse of wind feels like the heartbeat of the cosmos, measured, eternal, deliberate. But harmony never lasts forever. The same stars that guided the rains began, one day, to foretell drought instead. The heavens grew silent, the water withdrew. The constellations that once promised life now marked its ending, and so the people who had mapped the cosmos were forced to turn their eyes back to the ground, to a world beginning to die beneath them. What happens when the sky, once a friend and teacher, becomes a mirror of loss? That is where our journey turns next, to the slow unraveling of paradise, when the green Sahara faded into gold, and its people began to move eastward, chasing the last breath of water across the desert. Change does not announce itself with thunder. It begins quietly, a few summers with less rain, the wind lingering a little longer from the north, the lakes shrinking by inches each year. For those who lived in the Green Sahara, the end must have come not with catastrophe, but with silence. Frogs stopped singing, the grass grew thin, the once mighty rivers braided through the plains cracked into fragments and faded. Within a handful of generations, paradise dissolved. The Sahara, which had breathed water for millennia, began slowly to exhale. Scientists can trace this moment with heartbreaking clarity. At Lake Yoa in northern Chad, sediment cores drilled deep into the mud preserve a perfect timeline of climate history. Around 5000 BCE, layers filled with freshwater diatoms, tiny glass-shelled algae, abruptly vanish. In their place appear salt-loving species that can survive only in brine. The shift marks the exact moment when the monsoon collapsed and the last great humid phase of the Sahara came to an end. From then on, the dust began to rise. Even today, satellites capture its ghost. Vast plumes blowing westward across the Atlantic, carrying fragments of ancient lakes to feed the forests of the Amazon. The desert that once gave life now nourishes life an ocean away. The cause of this great transformation lay in the slow rhythm of Earth's orbit. The Milankovitch cycles, those vast celestial pendulums that tilt the planet and steer its seasons. As the northern hemisphere tilted away from the sun, tropical rains retreated southward. In a geological heartbeat, the Sahara dried. Within centuries, fertile grasslands turned to gravel and sand. Archaeological layers mirror this retreat. Camps once clustered along fertile valleys now lie buried beneath meters of dunes. Pottery from the final humid period shows desperate innovation. Vessels designed to store precious water, narrow-necked jars meant to capture dew overnight. Some even bear residues of resin, suggesting an attempt to seal moisture inside. In nearby rock shelters, the art of the Sahara changes too. The elegant swimmers and lush herds vanish, replaced by rough sketches of camels, spirals, and marching lines, perhaps maps of escape routes or spiritual prayers to the sky. Even creativity had turned towards survival. For those who remained, adaptation became art. Excavations at Wadi Tanedzuft and Mesak Setafet reveal small stone dams built to trap brief seasonal floods, the earliest evidence of water engineering in North Africa. Elsewhere, families dug deep wells lined with stones, ingenious structures that could reach aquifers dozens of meters below the surface. The first portable shelters appear at this time, woven tents of goat hair and palm fibre, light enough to move with the wind. These were the ancestors of today's Tuareg nomads, whose culture of mobility still carries echoes of that ancient exodus. Around 3500 BCE, the dunes advanced rapidly. Satellite data show ridges migrating south at measurable speeds, entire landscapes swallowed in slow motion. Oases that had sustained life for thousands of years vanished one by one, and so people began to move. Some followed the retreating rain southward into the Sahel, the narrow green belt below the desert. Others turned east, toward the only great river that never failed, the Nile. Along that lifeline, archaeologists find unmistakable fingerprints of the Sahara's refugees. At Nabta Playa, where the Great Stone Calendar once stood, smaller camps evolved into permanent villages. At Merimda Beni Salama, near the Nile Delta, simple clusters of huts became early agricultural settlements. The people who built them buried their dead with shells from the Sahara's ancient lakes and beads carved from ostrich egg. Traditions carried from their homeland. Even their houses faced east, toward the sunrise, mirroring the alignment of the megaliths they once raised to mark the stars. In their movement, they had brought with them not only their tools, but their philosophy, a worldview centered on cycles, renewal, and harmony with the cosmos. It is no coincidence that early Egyptian religion revered the rebirth of the sun and the flooding of the Nile as sacred acts of balance. These ideas may have been born in the desert, long before temples lined the riverbanks. The people who had once watched the monsoon rise from the horizon learned to read the sun in its place, turning cosmic observation into theology. The Nile, in this sense, did not invent civilization, it inherited one. The desert's wisdom had found a new home beside the river's edge. Yet even as culture migrated eastward, the Sahara did not fall silent. Beneath the dunes, entire valleys of stone houses, hearths, and burial grounds lay entombed. They were not destroyed, only hidden. The sand, moving like slow water, sealed them away in perfect preservation. For thousands of years, no one would see them again. But their imprint remained, faint but persistent, in the genes and traditions of those who survived. Genetic studies reveal this hidden continuity. DNA from ancient Saharan skeletons shows clear links to early Nile populations. Shared Y chromosome haplogroups trace a direct lineage between pastoralists of the Central Sahara and the first dynastic Egyptians. This is not merely contact, it is family. The builders of the first temples and tombs were descendants of desert astronomers and herders who once read the stars to find rain. The green heart of the Sahara, long thought to be barren of human significance, now emerges as the true ancestor of civilization. How does this reshape our understanding of history? Because it shows that civilization was not born from isolation or invention, but from migration and memory, from people carrying their knowledge forward through catastrophe. The Sahara did not lose its humanity. It spread it, scattering seeds of innovation like pollen on the wind. In the architecture of Egypt, in the solar cults of Ra, in the balance between chaos and order carved into stone, we still hear the logic of the desert, survival through harmony. But for every people who moved on, something remained behind. Beneath the endless dunes lie cities that sleep, entire chapters of human stories sealed beneath sand and time. For millennia they stayed hidden, awaiting rediscovery. And when modern science turned its gaze downward, through the lens of radar and satellite, those forgotten patterns began to reappear. Streets, foundations, outlines of homes. the ghost topography of an older world, awakening at last in the eyes of machines. And so, as the dust continues to whisper its ancient lullaby, another question stirs. If the people of the Sahara live on in our blood and culture, what stories do the sands themselves still remember? To answer that, we'll have to descend once more, beneath the surface, and trace the genetic and geological memory of the desert that never truly died. Even when the land forgets, the body remembers. Every human cell carries the story of migration written in spirals of DNA, a map of ancient journeys etched not in stone, but in flesh. When scientists began sequencing the genomes of North African and Near Eastern peoples, faint traces of the green Sahara resurfaced, not in ruins, not in myths, but in blood. From Gabero's ancient graves to teeth unearthed in Libya's Tadrat Akarkas, from fragments of bone discovered deep in the Tassili Naja, the same genetic whispers repeat a story older than Egypt, older than Mesopotamia, older even than the Indus Valley. Hidden within the DNA of these long-vanished people are signatures that reach back to an ancestor who lived here nearly 20,000 years ago, during one of the Sahara's early wet phases. Her lineage, tracked through mitochondrial haplogroups passed from mother to child, can still be found today across Africa and the Mediterranean. Her descendants followed the rhythm of shifting rains, spreading outward as the desert dried, carrying both life and memory wherever they went. Geneticists call this the green pulse, a wave of human migration that mirrored the waxing and waning of the monsoon. Each humid age invited settlement, each dry age sent people outward again, a cycle that repeated for millennia. The Sahara was not a void, but a heart that beat in tempo with the earth. Every exhalation of the desert scattered its people like pollen, sowing the seeds of future civilizations. DNA extracted from early Egyptian mummies adds another layer to this living puzzle. In 2017, genome sequencing from mummies in Abu Shir el-Melek, dating back 3,500 years, revealed a genetic blend, roughly half from North African foragers and pastoralists and half from Near Eastern farmers. This pattern suggests not isolation, but integration. Migration into the Nile Valley from the west as the Sahara dried. These newcomers brought their herds, their seasonal calendars, and their understanding of the sky. In their fusion with river communities, a new civilization emerged, one that would immortalize their desert science in temples and stars. The Nile, in this light, was not a cradle created from nothing. It was an ark, a vessel carrying the survivors of a dying paradise. Language, too, carries the imprint of that migration. Linguists tracing the Afro-Asiatic language family, which unites ancient Egyptian, Berber, Hausa, Somali, and the Semitic tongues, have long suspected its origin lies in the central Sahara during the humid period. The linguistic evidence is poetic. Shared words for water, cattle, sky, and rain ripple across tongues separated by vast distances. The grammar itself preserves the desert's logic, patterns of gender and number that mirror herding societies, where counting animals or measuring seasons defined survival. If true, every prayer whispered in Arabic, every Hebrew psalm, every hieroglyph carved into limestone carries within it a syllable of the Sahara's first language. Anthropologists find the same genetic memory preserved in culture, living fossils of ritual passed through habit and tradition. The indigo veils of the Tuareg, dyed so deeply they shimmer like night, may descend from ancient customs meant to shield against both sand and spirit. The way nomads still sing to calm their animals recalls the rock art scenes of painted herders, arms raised in rhythm beside cattle. Even the spiral tattoos found among some Sahel tribes echo the concentric symbols carved into Saharan stones. These practices are not inventions of the present. They are memories in motion, performed across generations until their origins are forgotten, but their essence remains. And then there are the animals themselves. To scientists, Perhaps the most remarkable revelation comes not from humans, but from cattle. Genetic sequencing of African herds reveals that domestication here did not drift from the Middle East, as once thought. It occurred locally around 9,000 years ago in the central Sahara. The earliest cattle bones from Nabta Playa already show selective breeding. Smaller horns, stronger backs, changes only human care could have created. These herders, sculpting life to fit their needs, carried their livestock eastward as the desert withered. The cattle became their compass, their wealth, their sacred memory. They were more than sustenance, they were living archives, each generation of animals preserving the knowledge of water, migration, and trust. Through them, the essence of the Sahara's vanished world walked into Egypt and beyond. Modern genetics paints a continuity across continents. Traces of ancient Saharan DNA appear not only in Egypt and the Sahel, but in Levantine and Mediterranean populations. Haplogroups that once pulsed in the green Sahara now ripple through the genome of modern humans, from Morocco to Crete, from Ethiopia to Spain. The Sahara's people did not disappear, they became us. To visualize this is to see the human story as an unbroken river flowing through time. Each tributary, migration, language, tradition, feeds into the vast delta we call civilization. The Sahara was not the desert's end, it was the source of the stream. Its genetic memory survives like an undercurrent beneath the sands, running unseen but eternal. Even now, the living descendants of that world trace its invisible lines. At the edge of the modern Sahara, nomads still walk the ancient routes by starlight, guided by wells known only by name. Some of those names, Tenere, Iferuan, Adra, echo words spoken before the pyramids were built. They describe places where water once flowed, where ancestors camped beneath palms and rain. The rivers are gone, but their names endure, passed from mouth to mouth like genetic code written in sound. To forget them would be to sever the last thread linking the present to the paradise beneath the dunes. How does this help us understand the question at the heart of this journey? What if civilization began beneath the sands of the Sahara? Because it reminds us that the desert never truly died. Its people, its animals, its language, its art, all survived by migration, inheritance, and adaptation. The Sahara's legacy lives within us, hidden in our cells and our speech, whispering through every breath we take. Civilization was not born in one place. It was carried, remembered, and remade. And while we can read these echoes in our DNA, another kind of memory lies waiting just beneath our feet, carved not into bone or blood, but into stone. As satellites peer deeper into the dunes, they reveal shadows of walls and streets, the outlines of forgotten cities that once thrived before the desert exhaled. Perhaps the final secret of the Sahara is not written in us, but buried still, waiting for the wind to move and the sand to part. Let's go there next, following the machines that now do what the human eye cannot, rediscovering the cities beneath the sand. In the 21st century, the Sahara is being rediscovered, not by shovel, but by satellite. The same instruments that watch hurricanes and monitor farmland are now peering beneath the dunes, revealing a landscape more complex than anyone imagined. From orbit, patterns begin to appear. Geometric shadows, faint rectilinear grids, and circular outlines too precise to be natural. They stretch across Mauritania, Chad, Libya, and Egypt, forming ghostly signatures of something once deliberate. The desert, long thought to be empty, is turning out to be an archive. The story began almost by accident. In the early 2000s, NASA's Shuttle Radar Topography mission mapped Africa's hidden terrain. In 2015, analysts reviewing data from Western Egypt noticed anomalies. Perfectly straight alignments buried under meters of sand, each grid oriented to the cardinal points. For some, these were tricks of erosion. For others, They were unmistakable signs of urban geometry, the kind of precision only human intention could produce. When European researchers followed up with ground-penetrating radar, the suspicion deepened. Beneath the dunes lay low stone walls forming courtyards, foundations, and intersecting streets. The images, captured through layers of compacted sand, revealed the bones of a settlement, a city without a name. Its coordinates are kept secret to prevent looting, but those who've seen the scans call it the Sahara's hidden city. Under satellite light, its streets reappear like veins in an ancient fossil. The evidence is spreading. On the Adrar Plateau of Mauritania, high-resolution drone surveys show a ring-shaped formation, its walls enclosing a central plaza. The resemblance to early Mesopotamian temple compounds is uncanny. Charcoal fragments tested from the site date to nearly 7000 BCE, when the Sahara was still a sea of grass. To the east, in northern Chad, aerial imaging reveals clusters of rectangular mounds arranged around what used to be a riverbed. Faint traces of causeways connect them, lines of communication or processional paths perhaps. The scale is immense, far too large for seasonal camps. Something organized once stood here, something that thought in straight lines and cardinal points. Skeptics remain cautious. The desert is a master of illusion. Dunes shift, salt crusts harden into geometric shapes. Wind carves forms that mimic architecture. But as evidence accumulates, coincidence loses credibility. Machine learning models trained on thousands of satellite images are now detecting patterns consistent with artificial design. When cross-referenced with old river systems mapped by radar, the results converge. These structures align along ancient waterways, arteries of trade and life that once crossed the green Sahara. A civilization built beside rivers that no longer exist. What kind of people built them? Excavations are limited, but scattered finds hint at a culture both practical and visionary. Stone tools finely polished, beads carved from ostrich eggshell, fragments of pottery glazed with mineral pigments not found locally. These details suggest long-distance exchange, an economy of movement and artistry. Some researchers believe these settlements were proto-urban centers, hubs for herders, traders, and artisans who navigated the Sahara's network of rivers and oases. To them, the desert was not a barrier, it was a highway. In Libya, a discovery deepened the mystery. Hidden beneath a layer of compacted sediment, archaeologists unearthed a smooth sandstone tablet, its surface etched with intersecting lines and shallow depressions filled with red pigment. Under infrared analysis, the layout resembled a map, perhaps of water sources or celestial alignments. The grid bears an eerie resemblance to the spiral symmetry of the Eye of the Sahara, almost as if both were born of the same idea, a sacred geometry uniting sky, water, and stone. If authentic, the tablet would be one of the oldest examples of abstract cartography on Earth, proof that people here were not only surviving, but mapping, measuring, imagining. The desert's paradox lies in its dual power, to erase and preserve. Sand destroys cities on the surface, but entombs what lies below, sealing it in oxygen-starved stillness. Where rain and roots would decay artifacts elsewhere, here they survive untouched. The Sahara, often seen as a graveyard, may be the world's greatest time capsule. Under its dunes lie entire valleys, river deltas, and urban footprints, preserved in darkness for 10,000 years. Every grain of sand is both shroud and guardian. As technology advances, we are learning to read the desert's pages. Ground-penetrating radar can now scan several dozen meters deep, and synthetic aperture radar can detect buried stone even through moving dunes. Each pass of a satellite adds a pixel to the picture, invisible streets becoming visible again, step by step. The Sahara is being mapped not by explorers on camels, but by algorithms orbiting at 700 kilometers above. The explorers now wear lab coats, not turbans. And what these digital eyes reveal challenges everything we thought we knew about human history. Civilization may not have burst suddenly into existence along the Nile or the Tigris. It may have grown gradually inside the Sahara, nurtured by communities that learned to organize, to plan, and to observe, long before the world had writing. The Nile, in that sense, was not the starting point, but the continuation of an idea born among sand and stars. The river carried the last survivors of the Green Sahara eastward, taking with them the blueprints of society, astronomy, ritual, trade, and the will to build permanence from impermanence. It's humbling to imagine that beneath our feet, under endless dunes, might lie the first architecture of humanity. Perhaps this is civilization's true origin, the moment when people stopped wandering and began to draw order on the landscape, carving meaning into the earth itself. The pyramids, the ziggurats, the temples that came later, all may be echoes built upon memories buried here in silence. Stand atop a dune at night and hold a radar image of the terrain. Beneath you, invisible streets twist and cross, waiting to breathe again. The sand shifts softly in the moonlight, whispering over what was once a market, a hearth, a doorway. Civilization, it seems, was never about empire or stone. It was about the will to remember, the instinct to leave a mark that even the wind could not erase. And perhaps the earth itself remembers. Its climate still turns in slow rhythm, wet to dry, life to dust, dust to life again. Scientists predict that thousands of years from now, the planet's orbit will tilt once more. The monsoon will return, rain will fall where none has in millennia, grass will spread over dunes, and the buried cities will awaken. Streets will surface, rivers will flow again, and the desert that once dreamed will open its eyes. When that happens, who will stand among those reborn ruins, and will they know that we too were part of this long cycle? Perhaps the answer lies ahead, not in the past, but in the future, when the Sahara breathes once more and life begins again where it first began. Night again. The dunes glow pale under a silver moon. The wind has softened to a sigh, tracing long serpents of sand across the horizon. It feels as if the desert is waiting, as if something beneath the surface is stirring after a long, deep sleep. In a sense it is. Earth's orbit never stands still. Every 20,000 years or so, the planet tilts slightly toward the sun, changing the way heat and rain are distributed. Climatologists call it the precessional cycle, but to the desert, it is simply breath. When the next inhalation comes, 10 or 15 millennia from now, monsoon clouds will once again rise from the Gulf of Guinea and sweep northward. The Sahara will green. Rivers will return to their beds. Lakes will bloom. The sleeping land will wake. Computer models already sketch this resurrection. They show water pooling in the basins of Megachad and Tamanrasset, grass spreading like fire across dunes, humidity weaving patterns of storm and life. Where today there is only sand, future generations may walk under trees, build homes, until soil that has rested for 10,000 years. The cradle will open again. If civilization once began beneath these sands, perhaps it is destined to begin there again. The rhythm of rebirth is inscribed in the geology itself, a cosmic heartbeat echoing through dust and time. Every civilization rises, falls, and rises elsewhere. Every landscape sleeps and dreams of its own renewal. The Sahara's story is not of death, but of patience. It teaches that what vanishes can also return, that silence is a kind of memory. Modern scientists and engineers are already listening. Projects across North Africa tap fossil aquifers to irrigate the desert's edge. Ecological visionaries imagine a great green wall stretching from Senegal to Djibouti, an echo of the forest that once was. To restore even part of the Sahara's life is to reenact an ancient pattern, humanity participating once more in the planet's long breath. But beyond the data lies something older, something mythic. The legends of Atlantis, of Tissilit, of the Green Garden lost to drought. They may be premonitions as much as memories. The stories persist because the cycle does. When the rains come again, the dunes will part to reveal forgotten stones. The rock art of Tassili will glisten with new moisture. The rivers of Tamanrasset will carve open their channels. And sunlight will strike once more the buried courtyards of cities that have not seen day since before Egypt was born. Imagine walking there, a future traveller on the shores of a reborn lake. The air would be sweet, full of insects and birds. Beneath your feet, layers of sediment hide the relics of people who once looked at the same horizon and wondered if their world would end. They could not know that their world would one day return. How does this final vision help us understand the title? What if civilization began beneath the sands of the Sahara? Because the question is not only about where we came from, but where we are going. If the Sahara has already given birth to civilization once, it reminds us that humanity's story is circular. Creation and forgetting, discovery and loss again and again. The cradle lies not in a place, but in the rhythm of renewal itself. The desert's next breath will come long after we are gone, but the pattern endures. Perhaps when that time arrives, another species will find our own ruins beneath the new grass and wonder, who were they, these people who vanished before the rains returned? The wind stirs, carrying fine dust across the moon. The dunes shimmer like water for an instant, and it feels as though the Sahara is whispering, not in grief, but in anticipation. The desert isn't dead, it's dreaming, and when it breathes again, the memory of civilization will rise with it. Thank you for listening to The Dream. If you've been following this journey through forgotten worlds, through myth and science intertwined, take a moment to breathe with the desert. And if the story moved you, stay close. There are more worlds still sleeping, waiting to be remembered.